It was a crisp October morning in 2020 in the small town of New Boston, Texas. A mother's anguished screams on a 911 call signaled the beginning of a nightmare. When police arrived at the modest home on Austin Street, they found 21-year-old Reagan Simmons-Hancock lying dead in a pool of blood. The young mother, 7.5 months pregnant, had been brutally attacked and her unborn baby cut from her womb. Nearby, in a child's bedroom, Reagan's 3-year-old daughter Kinley was discovered distraught but unharmed. The peaceful community was shattered by an atrocity almost beyond comprehension. To understand how such a horror could occur, one must delve into the life of Taylor Rene Parker. At 27 years old, Parker was a mother of 2 from prior relationships, known to some as a friendly, troubled young woman. Years before, medical complications had left her unable to bear any more children. A 2015 hysterectomy that followed the birth of her 2 children ensured she could never get pregnant again. Friends later recounted that Parker was devastated by the loss of her fertility. Behind her unremarkable small-town facade, however, Parker was living a lie. Those who knew her would testify that she had a history of lying and a penchant for elaborate deception. In late 2019, Parker began dating a new boyfriend, 20-year-old Wade Griffin, and became desperate to keep him in her life. Fearful of losing yet another relationship, she wove a complex web of fabrications. Parker faked being pregnant for roughly 10 months, determined to convince Wade and everyone else that they would soon have a baby together. She wore prosthetic pregnancy bellies, falsified ultrasound pictures, and even staged a joyous gender reveal party to celebrate the baby she claimed to be carrying. In reality, it was all a charade. She fooled us all. Taylor had sonogram printouts, a baby bump, the works. Looking back, it was unbelievable how far she went, a friend says, shaking her head. Parker's lies did not stop at her fake pregnancy. In court, prosecutors would later reveal that she concocted fantastical stories to maintain control over her relationships. She boasted of inheriting a fortune and promised Wade a $4.5 million farm. She spun a dark tale that her own mother had stolen her inheritance and even hired a hitman to kill her and Wade, a plot she claimed to have foiled with a private investigator. These outlandish claims were entirely false, but they served Parker's purpose: to ensnare her boyfriend in an inescapable tangle of dependence and sympathy. As one investigator later put it, she was mentally competent but utterly deceitful, living in a world of her own lies. By summer 2020, Parker had convinced Wade and their families that she was due to deliver a baby in late September. But as the supposed due date approached with no real pregnancy, Parker became increasingly frantic. She knew her ruse was days from collapse. Family members quietly suspected she might fake a miscarriage when the time came. Parker, however, was plotting something far more sinister. Reagan Simmons-Hancock was a vibrant 21-year-old wife, mother, and beloved daughter living in New Boston, Texas. Described by friends as sweet and full of life, Reagan had married her high school sweetheart, Homer Hancock, in 2019. She was already the mother of a little girl, 3-year-old Kinley, and was eagerly expecting her second child, a baby girl to be named Braxlyn Sage. In fall 2020, Reagan was nearly 8 months pregnant and excitedly making final preparations for her new arrival. Reagan and Taylor Parker were not strangers. In fact, their lives had intersected in a happy moment. Parker, an amateur photographer, had taken Reagan's engagement and wedding photos the year before. Although not extremely close, the two women were somewhat friends, according to Reagan's husband. They stayed connected via Facebook, and in the week leading up to the crime, Taylor Parker suddenly grew more attentive to Reagan, messaging her frequently. Parker even surprised Reagan with a gift, trying to deepen their bond. To Reagan, Parker seemed like a caring friend interested in her pregnancy. She had no idea that she had become the target of Parker's deadly obsession. Reagan was one of the kindest souls you'd ever meet. She was so excited for her baby. She never imagined someone she knew was planning to harm her. A friend recounts softly, eyes welling with tears. As Reagan's due date drew near in early October 2020, she looked forward to welcoming her new baby girl. Tragically, it was this very joy and anticipation that Taylor Parker sought to steal. In the first days of October 2020, Taylor Parker's elaborate lie was on the brink of unraveling. Parker had told everyone her baby was due September 22nd, then claimed doctors would induce labor on October 6th. She had to produce an infant immediately, or her entire deception would collapse, and with it, the life she had constructed around Wade Griffin. The pressure drove Parker to take extreme measures. Investigators later discovered that in the weeks before the murder, Parker's internet searches surged. She obsessively researched how to fake a pregnancy and watched videos of C-sections and premature baby care. She even scoped out maternity clinics, reportedly sitting in parking lots to stalk expectant mothers and jot down their license plate numbers, presumably hunting for a potential victim. On October 5, 2020, one day before Parker's claimed induction date, chaos struck Parker's own home. A suspicious fire broke out at the house she shared with Wade, knocking out the plumbing and electricity. The very next day, a bomb threat was phoned in to the obstetrics clinic where Parker was supposedly scheduled to deliver. Authorities would later tie both the arson and the bomb threat to Parker, believing she orchestrated them as distractions or delays. These desperate acts kept Wade and others from expecting a baby that day, buying Parker a bit more time. But time was running out. By October 8th, Parker had zeroed in on a target, her former client and acquaintance, Reagan Simmons-Hancock. That morning, cell phone data showed Parker drove to Reagan's neighborhood and parked nearby for an extended period. Perhaps she was casing Reagan's house or steeling herself for what she was about to do. That evening, Parker visited Reagan under friendly pretenses, just to hang out, as if nurturing the friendship. In reality, she was setting the stage for the violent plan that would unfold the next day. Unknown to Reagan or her family, Parker had devised a meticulous scheme for the morning of October 9, 2020. She needed two things to happen simultaneously. Reagan had to be alone and vulnerable, and Wade had to be far away, so he wouldn't interfere. Parker arranged for Wade to embark on a wild goose chase that morning, literally. She had earlier tricked a hog farmer in Oklahoma into believing someone, under a fake name, would sell him a load of livestock. On October 9th at 7:35 a.m., Wade showed up at that rancher's property several hours from home, towing a trailer of hogs that no one actually agreed to buy. It was a futile errand, concocted by Parker to keep Wade occupied far from New Boston. Her alibi and window of opportunity were in place. Meanwhile, at 6:35 a.m., Taylor Parker's phone records indicate she stopped for gas near Reagan's home. Between 7:22 and 7:52 a.m., Parker exchanged friendly text messages with Reagan. Perhaps she was confirming Reagan was awake and at home, or arranging a quick visit. Nothing seemed amiss to Reagan. This was her friend, after all. It's just after 8 a.m. on October 9th, 2020. Inside the Hancock residence, Reagan Simmons-Hancock is starting her day. Her toddler, Kinley, plays in the next room. Reagan's husband is already at work. She is alone, except for Taylor Parker, who has dropped by unexpectedly. In Reagan's kitchen, two friends chat casually, but tension hangs invisible in the air. Parker knows what she came to do. At some point that morning, Parker attacks. A sudden blow lands on Reagan, perhaps from behind. Reagan screams and fights back with every ounce of strength. A horrifying struggle erupts, tearing through multiple rooms of the house. Furniture is knocked over. Walls and floors become smeared with blood. Reagan is heard pleading and screaming. Neighbors would later report hearing loud, strange noises around this time. Parker wields a claw hammer, swinging it mercilessly. She brings it down on Reagan again and again, fracturing her skull 5 times and breaking her nose. In the frenzy, Parker grabs anything she can find as a weapon. A mason jar filled with pink and blue sand, a keepsake from Reagan's own gender reveal party, is smashed and used to bludgeon Reagan. Cruel irony that underscores the depravity of the act. Reagan is stabbed over 100 times with a small blade. Later, the medical examiner will find a scalpel blade embedded in Reagan's neck, a tool Parker likely brought with her, knowing what she planned to do next. Reagan fights valiantly. Defensive wounds cover her arms and hands, indicating she tried to grab the knife and fend off her attacker. Blood spatters in 4 or 5 different areas of the home, marking each desperate attempt Reagan made to escape or resist. But Parker is unrelenting. She beats, slashes, and perhaps even chokes Reagan. The coroner couldn't rule out strangulation, given a deep cut across Reagan's throat. After several minutes of sheer brutality, Reagan finally collapses in her living room, mortally wounded. What Parker does next is almost unspeakable. With Reagan incapacitated on the floor, possibly still alive, but barely, Parker takes the scalpel and slices into Reagan's abdomen from hip to hip. In a grotesque parody of a C-section, she cuts deep, opening Reagan's uterus. Parker reaches inside and removes Reagan's unborn baby girl, as well as the placenta from the womb. Reagan's mother would later cry that her daughter was alive, still fighting for her baby, when Parker tore her open and ripped her baby from her stomach. In those final moments, Reagan's maternal instincts may have kept her barely conscious, trying to save her child. But she could not. At some point during this crude surgery, Reagan Simmons-Hancock dies from her massive injuries. It is approximately 9 a.m. The living room is a scene of pure horror, blood everywhere, the young mother's lifeless body mutilated and empty. Taylor Parker gathers the newborn infant from the carnage. Baby Braxlyn Sage Hancock has been violently wrenched from her mother's womb at only 34 weeks gestation. The child is gravely injured and not breathing. Parker, however, has no medical training and no real plan to care for a premature infant. Her plan was only to steal the baby. Now she must flee. Parker snatches Reagan's cell phone, likely to prevent Reagan from calling for help, or perhaps to impersonate her briefly. She leaves Reagan's phone in Reagan's dying grasp would have been too risky. Indeed, Reagan's phone would never be seen again. Parker also leaves behind little Kinley, the 3-year-old, alone in the blood-soaked house with her slain mother. As unimaginable as it seems, evidence later showed that Kinley witnessed the aftermath of her mom's murder. The toddler was found with tiny bloody handprints on her, a heartbreaking sign she may have touched her mother trying to wake her. Parker shows no mercy to the living or the dead. With the newborn baby in her arms, Parker bolts from a house and speeds away in her car. At 9:14 a.m., less than 15 minutes after Reagan's life ebbed away, Taylor Parker's vehicle was spotted on highway surveillance leaving New Boston. Parker was racing toward the Oklahoma state line, toward what she hoped was her salvation. She needed to legitimize the baby in her arms as her own. Parker's endgame quickly came into focus. She would pretend she had just given birth, discover the baby wasn't breathing, and present herself as a distressed mother of a dying newborn. In her delusion, she likely believed the story could hold up long enough to avoid suspicion for Reagan's murder. By sheer happenstance, or perhaps by her own frantic driving, Parker did not make it far before attracting attention. Around 9:30 a.m., a Texas state trooper in DeKalb, Texas, near the Oklahoma border, noticed a car driving erratically and at high speed. He initiated a traffic stop. As the trooper approached the driver's side, he was met with a bizarre and alarming sight. Taylor Parker was behind the wheel, cradling a newborn infant on her lap. The umbilical cord was still attached to the baby, and astonishingly, it was protruding from Parker's own pants. Parker was covered in blood, from her hands to her legs and feet. She immediately spun a tale to the trooper. She had just given birth on the side of the road, and the baby wasn't breathing. She was trying to perform CPR on the infant, she said, and urgently needed help. The trooper's training told him something was very wrong with this scene. For one, there was little blood on the baby and none on the driver's seat of the car, despite Parker's clothing being bloody. If a baby had truly been born moments ago in that seat, blood would be everywhere. Much of the blood on Parker appeared dry, not fresh. And the umbilical cord, it was not connected to a placenta inside Parker's body at all, but merely stuffed into her pants. In fact, as the trooper later testified, a placenta fell out of Parker's clothing onto the ground as she exited the car. Parker was frantic, insisting on going to a hospital in nearby Idaho, Oklahoma, where she claimed her doctor was, an oddly specific request in an emergency. The trooper called for an ambulance immediately. At 9:37 a.m., paramedics rushed the newborn to McCurtain Memorial Hospital in Idaho, just over the state line in Oklahoma. Parker was also transported to the same hospital, still asserting she had given birth unexpectedly. Hospital staff took the baby, little Braxlin, into intensive care. The infant was in critical condition, not breathing on her own, and showing no signs of healthy vital function. As doctors and nurses fought to save the baby's life, other staff began tending to Parker. That is when Parker's story collapsed. Emergency room personnel quickly noted that Parker showed no physical indications of having just given birth. A cursory external exam found no postpartum bleeding, no placenta in her uterus, and surgical scars consistent with a past hysterectomy. Startled, the doctors performed an internal exam and discovered Parker had no uterus at all. It had been removed years earlier. There was also zero evidence of pregnancy hormones in her blood. In short, it was medically impossible that Parker had delivered this baby. Confronted with these facts, Parker refused a more thorough examination and became evasive. Hospital staff alerted law enforcement on both sides of the state line. Something was terribly wrong. Who was this woman with a newborn? And where had this baby really come from? Even as these questions swirled at the Oklahoma hospital back in New Boston, Texas, the puzzle pieces were falling into place. By 10:15 a.m., Reagan's husband Homer, unable to reach his wife by phone, had asked Reagan's mother, Jessica Brooks, to check on Reagan at home. Jessica arrived to a scene of unimaginable horror. Her daughter brutally slain, and the baby, her grandchild, nowhere to be found. Jessica's anguished 911 call opened this story. Police swarmed the crime scene and immediately put out alerts. They soon learned that a woman had been stopped in DeKalb, Texas, that same morning with a gravely injured newborn. By early afternoon, Texas authorities confirmed to their Oklahoma counterparts that the baby in Parker's custody was Braxlyn Sage Hancock, Reagan's daughter. The lives of the two women, Taylor Parker and Reagan Hancock, were now tragically, fatally intertwined. Sadly, despite doctors' efforts, the infant Braxlyn could not be saved. She had been without proper oxygen for too long during and after the violent delivery. At 1:22 p.m. on October 9, 2020, baby Braxlyn was removed from life support and pronounced dead at the hospital. The charge would later be capital murder for Taylor Parker. 2 lives taken, a young mother and her newborn child. That afternoon, Texas Rangers and Oklahoma State Bureau agents placed Taylor Parker under arrest at the hospital. In the span of a single morning, Parker's monstrous plan had unraveled. Yet, As investigators soon discovered, she was far from finished with her lies. In the wake of Taylor Parker's arrest, a joint investigation by Texas and Oklahoma authorities began unearthing the full, shocking story behind the crime. Parker initially stuck to a bizarre story. In interviews with police, she claimed that an altercation with Reagan just got out of hand. She told detectives that Reagan had confronted her in the garage and that they fought, a tale plainly at odds with the evidence of a premeditated ambush. Parker insisted that Reagan was the aggressor, alleging Reagan had pushed her and started the fight. As Parker's story went on, it veered into the fantastical. She claimed that during the struggle, Reagan was gravely injured and begged Parker to save her baby, imploring Parker to cut the infant out to rescue it. Parker asserted she was merely fulfilling her dying friend's wish by performing the crude C-section. Incredibly, Parker even implied that Reagan somehow finished herself off, suggesting that after Parker delivered the baby and left, Reagan must have slashed her own throat with a scalpel in a suicidal act. It was an outrageous lie, but Parker delivered it with a straight face. Investigators were not fooled. A doctor later testified that the pain of an unanesthetized cesarean, like the one inflicted, would be so excruciating that Reagan could not possibly have stayed conscious, let alone harm herself. Parker's tale was dismissed as one more desperate lie. As forensic teams processed the grisly crime scene at the Hancock home, and technicians combed through Parker's digital footprints, a mountain of evidence emerged to dismantle Parker's lies. Blood, evidence, and the sheer brutality of the scene showed that Reagan had fought ferociously, not attacked Parker. Detectives recovered the broken murder weapons, the bloodied hammer, the shattered mason jar, and knives, evidence of Parker's pre-armed intent. On Reagan's neck, the embedded scalpel blade spoke volumes. Parker's cell phone yielded a damning timeline of her movements and intentions. There were the text exchanges with Reagan that very morning, luring the unsuspecting young mother into a trap. GPS and surveillance confirmed Parker's presence at the scene, the 6:35 a.m. gas station stop near Reagan's house, and her departure after 9 a.m. Even more telling were Parker's internet search histories and social media activity in the months prior. Investigators found that Parker had obsessively researched topics like how to fake a pregnancy without getting caught and watched tutorial videos on delivering premature infants. She had ordered a silicone pregnancy belly online and downloaded sonogram images to bolster her ruse. In one chilling discovery, agents learned that on the morning of the murder, before driving to Reagan's home, Parker watched a video about the examination of babies born at 35 weeks gestation, almost precisely the age of Reagan's unborn child. It was as if she was studying last-minute instructions for what she was about to do. This was proof positive of premeditation. Investigators also uncovered Parker's elaborate attempts to engineer alibis and distractions. The fake hog sale that sent Wade Griffin out of town, the arson at her own home on October 5th, and the phoned-in bomb threat on October 6th. Parker had gone to astonishing lengths to plan this crime. She had even pilfered an old ID from work to pose as a medical professional if needed, a detail revealed later at trial. Piece by piece, law enforcement constructed a comprehensive picture of Parker's scheme and the motive behind it. On October 12, 2020, Taylor Parker was indicted in Texas on 2 counts of capital murder for Reagan and baby Braxlin, and 1 count of kidnapping. Because baby Braxlin had died across state lines in Oklahoma, an Oklahoma grand jury also issued a separate indictment charging Parker with the baby's murder. The coordinated prosecution ensured Parker would face justice for both lives lost. Parker pleaded not guilty to all charges, maintaining her innocence as the case headed toward trial. As the investigation deepened, Parker's behavior behind bars only reinforced the portrait of a remorseless manipulator. While awaiting trial in Bowie County Jail, Parker continued to lie and scheme brazenly. Prosecutors later revealed that she repeatedly and continuously engaged in criminal behavior in jail, from violating rules to concocting new scams. She abused the jail's email and phone systems to spin more falsehoods, even tearing up her jail uniforms to make them more revealing in an apparent ploy to seduce or influence others. Incredibly, Parker tried to orchestrate a plot to fabricate evidence and frame another inmate, a mentally fragile woman, for the very crime Parker herself had committed. All of this would later come out in court, showing that even incarceration could not stop Parker's deceitful machinations. As Bowie County's lead prosecutor succinctly put it, Taylor Parker has proven, time and again, that she will lie, cheat, and hurt anyone to get what she wants. Statement from trial. 2 years after the horrific events, justice caught up with Taylor Parker in a Texas courtroom. The trial of Taylor Rene Parker for capital murder began in September 2022 in Bowie County, drawing intense media attention. The gallery was packed with family members, local residents, and reporters, all there to glimpse the woman accused of a crime almost too horrible to imagine. Parker, now 29, sat at the defense table, face mask covering much of her expression, a reminder of the COVID-tinged times. Over the course of 3 weeks, prosecutors methodically laid out the case that Parker had planned and executed the murder of Reagan Simmons-Hancock and the abduction of baby Braxlin in cold blood. They called over 100 witnesses, painting a comprehensive and damning portrait of Parker's deceit and violence. The prosecution's narrative was straightforward and devastating. Motive: Parker needed a baby to keep her boyfriend, Wade, from leaving. She was willing to kill for it. Means and opportunity: Parker faked a pregnancy for months, identified a vulnerable victim, Reagan, and struck when her boyfriend and the victim were isolated. They presented evidence of Parker's elaborate lies, from fake ultrasounds to the staged gender reveal party, proving her entire pregnancy was a fraud. Witnesses, including Parker's former OB/GYN and her own mother, testified that Parker could not have been pregnant due to her prior hysterectomy. Friends recounted how Parker had lied about miscarriages, surrogates, even inventing children that never existed. Her web of lies was laid bare in excruciating detail. Parker's 2 ex-husbands testified about her history of deception. One recalled she even faked seizures for attention. Wade Griffin himself took the stand, describing how he had been utterly fooled by Parker's claimed pregnancy, and how he was lured away to Oklahoma the morning of the murder under false pretenses. Phone records, surveillance video, and forensic evidence all corroborated the timeline of Parker's actions. Jurors were shown the blood-stained tools of the crime and photos of the devastating crime scene, Reagan's body lying on the living room floor, surrounded by the evidence of Parker's savagery. Seasoned investigators and even hardened jurors struggled with the graphic nature of the proof. Several jurors wept during testimony about the baby. Some counselors were on standby to help jurors process the trauma of what they saw and heard. Perhaps most chilling was Parker's own voice, heard in recordings of her police interrogations. In video clips played for the jury, Parker calmly repeated her far-fetched story that Reagan had attacked her and asked Parker to cut the baby from her womb. The jury watched Parker claim that Reagan was alive when she left, implying someone else must have killed her after, an assertion that rang false in the face of all evidence. Parker's effect in these interviews was described as cold, with little genuine remorse. The prosecution reminded jurors that Parker had been evaluated and deemed mentally competent to stand trial. Her outrageous lies were not the product of delusion, but of calculation. The defense faced an overwhelming challenge. Taylor Parker's court-appointed attorneys did not attempt to argue innocence outright. The evidence was too strong. Instead, they focused on technicalities and pleas for mercy. In the guilt phase, the defense's main argument was that baby Braxlin was never born alive, and therefore the charge of kidnapping and the second capital murder count for the baby might not legally apply. They contended that if the infant was not a living person outside the womb, Parker should not be guilty of kidnapping resulting in death, which elevated the crime to capital murder. It was a thin argument, given that medical testimony showed the baby had a heartbeat and was kept alive on a ventilator for hours before dying. Prosecutors countered that under Texas law, the unlawful removal of a fetus from a mother's body and causing its death is capital murder. The judge's instructions to the jury reflected this interpretation. In closing arguments on October 3, 2022, lead prosecutor Kelly Crisp pulled no punches. She projected an image of Reagan's blood-soaked body on a screen for the jury one more time. Crisp's voice trembled with controlled outrage as she described how Parker had slashed Reagan hundreds of times and beaten her until her skull caved in. This was not a fight between friends, Crisp declared. This was a calculated massacre. Taylor Parker is a danger and will always be a danger. She attacked a mother in her own home and ripped out her child. Who does that? Crisp argued that the sheer brutality of the crime and Parker's continued scheming even behind bars proved she could never be trusted in society again. She urged the jury to find Parker guilty on all counts and later to choose the ultimate punishment. The defense, in their closing, attempted to humanize Parker. Attorney Jeff Harrelson acknowledged the horrifying nature of the crime, but asked jurors to consider Parker's troubled life and mental state. Words can be used to dehumanize, he cautioned, objecting to the prosecution's use of words like evil and monster for his client. Harrelson reminded the jury that she is a human with layers and shades of gray in her life. He suggested that Parker's friends and family had failed her by not intervening when her lies spiraled out of control. There was no safety net when everyone saw the wheels were off, he lamented, subtly shifting some blame outward. It was a plea for understanding, if not forgiveness, but it likely rang hollow given the savagery of Parker's actions. After weeks of testimony and emotional strain, the jurors needed less than 1 hour of deliberation to reach a verdict. On October 3, 2022, the jury returned to the hushed courtroom and delivered their unanimous decision: guilty on all counts. Taylor Rene Parker was convicted of capital murder for the killing of Reagan Simmons-Hancock and the kidnapping and death of Braxlin Sage Hancock. As the verdict was read, Reagan's family members clutched one another and wept in relief. Parker showed little visible reaction, staring straight ahead. For the first time, the woman who had woven so many lies was confronted with the truth of her deeds in a court of law. The trial's second phase, sentencing, now loomed, and the stakes were literally life or death. Parker's conviction meant she faced either life in prison without parole or the death penalty. Texas prosecutors had signaled early on they would pursue a death sentence, and now they pressed that case. The sentencing hearing commenced on October 12, 2022, before the same jury. For several additional weeks, the court delved into Parker's background, character, and the lasting impact of her crimes. The most powerful moments in the sentencing phase came from the victim impact statements. Reagan's family members addressed the court and Parker directly, painting a portrait of the loved ones Parker had so brutally taken. Reagan's mother, Jessica Brooks, stood just a few feet from the woman who murdered her daughter and unborn granddaughter. Overcome with grief and anger, she spoke through tears. "You're an evil piece of flesh, a demon," she spat at Parker. She described how Reagan had been excited to name her baby Braxlin, how Kinley would grow up without her mommy. In a raw and unforgettable statement, Jessica told Parker, "My baby was alive, still fighting for her babies when you tore her open and ripped her baby from her stomach." Reagan's husband Homer Hancock also spoke. sharing through sobs that every morning he wakes up to an empty bed and a daughter asking for her mommy. He said he can never erase the image of finding Reagan that day, and that Parker had destroyed his entire world. After hearing all the evidence and arguments, the jury deliberated on Parker's fate. It did not take long. On November 9, 2022, they returned with a unanimous decision. Taylor Rene Parker would be sentenced to death. As the verdict was announced, Parker remained mostly stoic. Reagan's family quietly embraced, tears of relief mingling with sadness. Judge John Tidwell then addressed the court. The jury having answered the special issues in favor of a death sentence, it is the order of this court that the defendant, Taylor Parker, be sentenced to death. Looking directly at Parker, the judge spoke the final words of the trial. "Take her to death row." With that, Parker was led away in handcuffs, becoming the first woman sentenced to death in Texas in nearly 8 years. Following her sentencing, Taylor Parker was swiftly transferred to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's Mountain View Unit, home to the state's female death row. On November 14, 2022, she became the 7th woman awaiting execution in Texas. In Texas, death row inmates live under strict conditions, and Parker is no exception. She resides in a solitary cell about 60 square feet in size, just enough space for a bunk, a steel toilet sink combo, and a small writing table. She spends 22 to 23 hours a day in that cell. For 1 or 2 hours daily, she is allowed out to an exercise yard or a day room, usually alone. Unlike male death row inmates in Texas, female death sentence prisoners can have certain work assignments, like sewing prison garments or assembling craft items, under heavy supervision. Parker, known for her manipulative tendencies, is closely watched by prison staff. Any infractions or scheming on her part could result in loss of privileges or additional restraints. As of 2025, Parker is in her early 30s and has begun the long journey through the appeals process. In Texas, all capital murder death sentences receive automatic appeal to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. Parker's case was duly docketed in late 2022. Her appellate attorneys have filed briefs arguing for a reversal of her conviction or sentence on various grounds. Key issues likely include the defense's contention about whether Braxlin was legally considered alive, and thus whether the kidnapping charge was valid, as well as challenges to some graphic evidence admitted at trial and the emotional 911 call that was played for jurors. Parker's team may also argue that pretrial publicity made it impossible for her to get a completely fair trial, given the intense media coverage. The state countered that the evidence of Parker's guilt was overwhelming and that any minor legal issues would be harmless error. Legal experts note that Parker's chances of escaping her death sentence are slim, but not non-existent. Texas's highest criminal court will scrutinize the trial record for reversible errors. If the conviction and sentence are upheld, Parker can then appeal to federal courts. This appeals process can stretch on for years, even decades. A Texas death row inmate spends an average of over 15 years awaiting execution due to these lengthy appeals. Parker is likely to be no exception. With 6 other women on Texas's death row, the average time served so far among them is about 20 years, a statistic that suggests Parker may be living in her solitary cell for a long time to come. Whether Taylor Parker will ever be executed remains to be seen, one legal commentator wrote, highlighting the uncertainties that surround capital punishment appeals. As of now, no execution date has been set for Parker, and her case is winding through the appellate courts. If one day Parker's appeals are exhausted and an execution date is scheduled, Texas law will dictate the grim ritual. It's worth noting that Texas no longer offers a special last meal request to condemned inmates, a policy changed in 2011, so Parker would likely receive the same meal as others on her final day, should that day come. Parker has also made no public statement of contrition or last words. In fact, in all her court appearances, she never took the stand to apologize or explain. A jail counselor testified that Parker never expressed remorse for the crimes. It remains uncertain if, facing execution, she would choose to speak any final words of apology or maintain her lies to the end. The tale of Taylor Parker is a stark reminder of the evil that can hide behind a mask of normalcy. It is a story of a woman who craved love and attention so desperately she was willing to destroy other lives to fabricate her own twisted dream. It is also the story of a community's resilience, of investigators who unraveled a heinous plot, of a family who fought for justice, and of a little girl who will grow up cherishing the memory of a mother and baby sister taken far too soon. As the prison walls close around Taylor Parker, society has rendered its verdict. Some acts are so cruel, so calculated, that they forfeit a person's place among us. In the words of Judge Tidwell, take her to death row. And there Taylor Parker sits today, alone with the truth of her deeds, awaiting the final judgment of her life, a dark chapter in true crime that will not soon be forgotten.